At the family gathering, my parents slid a velvet box across the table. My brother Callan opened it and found keys to a $1.2 million mansion, everyone cheering. Then my mother turned to me, pressed a crumpled $5 bill in my palm, and whispered, "This is all you're worth, Nola." My vision blurred, but instead of crying, I stood up, walked away, and within an hour, everything changed. The dinner table was filled with laughter, glasses clinking, and smiling faces. Everyone's attention was on Callan, as if he was the only star in the room. Plates of food were set aside when their parents proudly stood up and pulled out a velvet box. The air grew heavy with excitement as they slid it across the table to Callan. He opened it, and inside lay shiny new keys. The announcement came with pride. Those were the keys to a $1.2 million mansion. The room erupted in cheers, claps, and congratulations. Relatives stood, hugging him as though he had won a great battle. His cousins shouted his name, his uncles patted his back, and his parents looked at him with eyes full of admiration. But across the table sat Nola. Her palms were sweaty, her chest tight. She waited, hoping for even a small word of kindness. Instead, her mother leaned close, pressed a crumpled $5 bill into her hand, and whispered coldly, "This is all you're worth." The note felt heavy, heavier than gold, because it carried the weight of rejection. Her fingers trembled around it, the paper burning her skin with humiliation. While Callan smiled wide, soaking in the love, Nola lowered her eyes. Every laugh around her stabbed deeper, especially when someone joked that at least she could buy herself a meal with the money. A few cousins smirked, others exchanged mocking glances, and no one tried to defend her. She sat in silence, her throat dry, her heart pounding harder than ever. The difference was clear. One child lifted high like a king, the other treated like dust under their feet. The mansion key gleamed in Callan's hand, but in Nola's palm lay a wrinkled bill that screamed of rejection. She did not argue. She did not beg. She sat quietly, letting her silence speak louder than words. Inside her, though, something shifted. It was not weakness that grew in that moment, but fire. Fire born from humiliation. Fire that would one day burn brighter than the cheers that filled the room. While her family celebrated their golden child, Nola sat still, unnoticed, but in her heart, a storm was gathering. And that storm was only just beginning. The laughter spread across the room like wildfire, loud and careless, cutting deeper than any knife. One of the relatives, half drunk and full of boldness, leaned back in his chair and pointed at Nola with a grin. "At least she can buy herself a meal with that," he said, nodding toward the crumpled $5 still clenched in her fist. The table erupted again, some slapping the table, others covering their mouths as if the insult was too funny to hold back. Her cousins leaned into each other, smirking, their eyes fixed on her like hunters circling their prey. A few whispered, "Poor thing," but their voices carried no pity, only mockery. Her aunts shook their heads with fake sympathy, pretending to feel sorry while their lips curled in cruel amusement. Every laugh echoed in her chest, pounding against her ribs until it felt hard to breathe. Nola sat still, her face calm, but her heart was heavy. She did not lift her eyes to meet theirs because she knew what she would find: ridicule, pity, and dismissal. The $5 note in her hand crumpled tighter as her fingers pressed into it. She wanted to throw it down, but she held it firm. She knew if she reacted, they would laugh louder. If she cried, they would say she was weak. So she chose silence. Her silence was not emptiness. It was power. It was her shield, stronger than any words she could have spoken. They thought she was swallowing shame, but in truth, she was swallowing fuel. Every laugh, every smirk, every cruel whisper only added to the fire inside her. She kept her head low, but in her heart, something began to shift. Her brother Callan raised his glass, smiling proudly, basking in the endless praises. "To my new home," he shouted, and once again the room cheered. They lifted him high like a king, but Nola knew kings could fall. The same people who mocked her today would one day bow their heads in silence when her name was spoken. No one noticed the fire flickering in her eyes, hidden behind her lowered gaze. No one saw how her lips pressed together, not from weakness, but from control. They thought they had broken her, but they had only awakened her. In that moment, Nola made no vow out loud. She did not need to. Her silence spoke it clearly. One day she would rise, and when she did, their laughter would turn into regret. Nola sat at the table for a moment longer, letting the noise of laughter and clinking glasses blur into the background. Her hand loosened around the crumpled $5 bill, and she looked at it one last time before slipping it into her pocket. Without a word, she pushed back her chair. No one stopped her, no one asked where she was going. They were too busy praising Callan, too busy celebrating what they believed was greatness. To them, she was invisible, and maybe that was her advantage. She walked out of the mansion slowly, her steps calm but steady. Behind her, the music played louder, the crowd cheered louder, but none of it mattered anymore. The night air hit her face, cool and freeing. She looked up at the dark sky, where the stars shone faintly, and for the first time in years, she felt a strange kind of peace. Her family thought she had left because she was ashamed, but they were wrong. She was not running away in defeat. She was stepping out to begin something they could not imagine. The path outside was quiet, lined with streetlights that stretched into the distance. In front of her, the glow of the city shimmered, tall buildings standing, proud against the night. Those lights seemed to call her name, whispering promises of a new life, one she could build with her own hands. She had nothing in her pockets except the wrinkled bill, but inside her heart, she carried something more powerful, resolve. With each step she took away from the mansion, she shed the weight of their insults. The cruel jokes, the mocking eyes, the years of being treated as less. All of it began to fall away like dust behind her. She could almost hear her mother's voice saying she was worthless, but instead of hurting, it pushed her forward. She did not know where she was going, and she did not know how she would start. But she knew she could not stay in a place where love was given as a reward and dignity was denied. She had to write her own story, even if the first page was blank and uncertain. Nola kept walking, her steps growing firmer with every block. The mansion faded in the distance, its glowing windows now just a shadow. Ahead, the city lights grew brighter, like beacons waiting to guide her. She was no longer the girl holding $5 in shame. She was the woman stepping into the unknown, ready to fight for the life she deserved. Nola walked through the quiet streets, her mind heavy but her steps steady. She was lost in thought, thinking only of how far she had come from that cruel dinner table, when she accidentally bumped into someone near a small cafe. The woman she stumbled into was elegant, dressed simply but with a kind of quiet power that made people turn their heads. Her name was Amelie, and though Nola did not know it yet, this meeting would change her life. Amelie steadied her and looked closely at her face. There was something familiar in Nola's eyes, something that made her pause. After a moment she asked softly, "You're Nola, aren't you? The granddaughter of Adiz?" Nola froze at the name. Her grandmother Adiz had been the only person in the family who ever believed in her worth, but she had passed years ago. Hearing her name from a stranger's lips felt like a gift. "Yes, I'm her granddaughter," Nola replied quietly. Amelie's expression softened. "Your grandmother was a strong woman. She once helped me when I had nothing. I never forgot her kindness." Nola's throat tightened. For a moment, she felt her grandmother's presence beside her, as if guiding her to this meeting. Amelie's sharp eyes studied her carefully. She noticed the crumpled $5 note still poking from Nola's pocket, and she noticed too the calm strength in her posture, even after such humiliation. Many in her place would have broken down, but Nola's dignity stood firm. Amelie admired that. "Come," Amelie said gently, pointing to the cafe. "Sit with me. Let's have some coffee." Nola hesitated at first, but then followed. They sat by the window, warm light spilling across the table. For the first time in hours, Nola felt safe enough to breathe. Amelie leaned forward, her voice patient. "Tell me what happened. Tell me your story." And Nola did. She spoke of her family's favoritism, the years of being overlooked, the dinner where her brother was crowned with a mansion while she was handed a crumpled bill. She spoke without bitterness, only truth, her voice steady but full of quiet pain. Amelie listened without interrupting, her expression thoughtful. When Nola finished, Amelie reached across the table and held her hand. "Your grandmother once gave me courage when I needed it most. Tonight, I see her strength living in you. You may not know it yet, but you have the fire to build something greater than they ever imagined." In that moment, Nola felt the first spark of change. It was small, but it was real. For the first time, the road ahead did not feel so lonely. The cafe was warm and filled with the gentle hum of voices, but at the small corner table, It felt as if the world had grown quiet just for Nola and Amelie. Steam rose from their cups, curling into the air, carrying with it the comfort of fresh coffee. Amelie sat back, studying Nola with patient eyes, the kind of eyes that searched past the surface and into the heart. "What do you want, Nola?" she asked softly. "Not what your family wants. Not what others think you deserve. What do you in your own soul truly want in life?" For a long time, Nola was silent. No one had ever asked her that before. At least not in a way that made her feel her answer mattered. She looked down at her trembling hands, then lifted her gaze with newfound steadiness. Her voice was quiet but strong. "I want to build something that can never be taken away from me. Not a gift from someone's pity, not something that can be mocked or dismissed. I want something that is mine, created by my own hands." Amelie's lips curved into the smallest smile. She could hear the honesty, the hunger, the determination in those words. It reminded her of the same fire she once carried when she was starting out. She leaned closer, her tone serious now. "That dream you just spoke, it is not small. It is the kind of dream that can change your life, but only if you are ready to fight for it." "I am ready," Nola said without hesitation. Her chest tightened as she spoke, but it wasn't fear, it was conviction. For the first time, she was not afraid of her own voice, not afraid of declaring her worth. Amelie nodded slowly, her respect for Nola growing deeper. "Then maybe it is time someone opened a door for you." She reached into her bag and pulled out a sleek black notebook. Inside were names and numbers. People who held power, people who could change futures. "These are investors I trust. I will introduce you to them. Not because of your family name, not because of pity, but because I see something real in you." Nola's breath caught. It felt like holding the first piece of a puzzle she never thought she could begin. She gripped the warm cup in her hands, her heart pounding with hope. That night, over coffee and quiet words, the seeds of a new beginning were planted. They were small, but Nola knew that with care, those seeds could grow into something unshakable, something that would finally prove her worth. Callan's mansion stood tall on the edge of the city, its white walls gleaming under the sun like a trophy. On the first day, neighbors came to admire it, relatives arrived with smiles, and Callan walked through the gates as though he were royalty. To him, the house was proof that he was the chosen one, the golden child. But soon, what was meant to be his crown became a heavy chain. Callan loved attention more than anything else, and the mansion became his stage. Every weekend, the halls echoed with loud parties, cars lined the driveway, music blasted through the windows, and strangers filled the rooms. He spent money carelessly, on clothes, on drinks, on people who only stayed close because of what he could offer. His friends cheered him on, but none of them cared about the bills piling up behind closed doors. Inside, the furniture was expensive but bought on credit. The kitchen was stocked with the finest wine, but unpaid invoices sat unopened on the counter. He signed loan papers without reading them, convinced that his parents would always protect him if anything went wrong. And indeed, his parents looked at him with the same proud eyes they always had. They visited the mansion, smiled at its beauty, and told everyone how successful their son was. When a neighbor whispered about his reckless spending, they waved it off. "He's young," they said. "He's enjoying life." When someone hinted that his debts were growing, they shook their heads in denial. They refused to believe their golden child could be falling. But behind the smiles, Callan was beginning to feel the cracks. The house was too big for him to manage. The bills came faster than the money he earned, and soon the parties were less about fun and more about hiding his struggles. He drowned his fear in laughter, but at night, when the lights went off, and the mansion grew quiet, the silence reminded him of everything he owed. Still, he could not stop. His pride would not allow it. To the world, he had to look untouchable, and to his parents, he had to remain perfect. So he continued to spend, continued to flaunt, and continued to smile even as the ground beneath him grew weaker. The mansion that once made him feel powerful was slowly becoming a prison. Each debt was a crack in its walls, each lie another weight on his shoulders. Yet his parents, blinded by favoritism, saw only the shining surface. They clapped for him while ignoring the storm that was building. And while Callan struggled under the shaky crown they had placed on his head, far away, Nola was quietly building something solid, something that no storm could ever shake. Nola's days began before the sun rose and stretched long into the night. She carried a small notebook everywhere she went, scribbling ideas whenever they came. Most of those ideas failed at first. Investors shook their heads, some laughed, others simply ignored her. Each rejection stung, but none of them broke her. Every no became fuel for her next try. She learned from her mistakes, adjusted her plans, and came back stronger each time. Her first attempt was small, an idea for an online service that connected local craft makers to customers. It stumbled, but instead of giving up, she studied why it failed. She listened to feedback, observed the market, and returned with improvements. Her second attempt did a little better, but still collapsed under pressure. Instead of despair, she called it training. Every failure was teaching her something her family never could: resilience. Weeks turned into months, and slowly, she began to gain ground. With Amelie's guidance and introductions, she found people willing to listen, people who respected her determination even when her projects weren't perfect. She started small again, but this time with sharper focus and deeper resolve. Her new idea was bold, innovative, an app that helped small businesses manage resources in ways no one had done before. This time the spark caught. The app spread quietly at first, used by a handful of shop owners. But soon word spread of how effective it was. Demand grew. Investors who once dismissed her came back, this time eager to be part of her vision. Contracts were signed, meetings filled her calendar, and her tiny seed of an idea blossomed into a business that could no longer be ignored. Media outlets picked up her story. Articles appeared with her picture, headlines praising her creativity and persistence. She was invited to panels, interviews, and conferences. People spoke her name with admiration. Nola, the young woman who built something from nothing, who turned rejection into power. Back in the family circle, whispers began. The same relatives who once smirked at her $5 bill started to mention her achievements. Some pretended they had always believed in her, others remained silent but restless. Even her parents, who once looked through her as if she were invisible, found it harder to ignore the growing shadow of her success. Nola didn't chase their recognition anymore. She worked for herself, for her vision, for the life she wanted to build. And as her name spread wider, as respect grew louder, she realized something powerful. The girl once mocked for being worthless was becoming a woman everyone wanted to know. 2 years passed, and the mansion that once shone like a crown for Callan no longer carried the same glory. The garden was overgrown, the walls were fading, and the mailbox was stuffed with letters he no longer dared to open. Most of them were from creditors demanding payment. The parties had stopped months ago, the music silenced by the weight of debts. One by one, his friends disappeared, leaving behind only unpaid tabs and empty promises. The same people who cheered him now avoided his calls. Inside, the once grand halls felt cold and empty. Furniture that had once been bought on credit was repossessed, and the luxury cars that lined his driveway were gone. He tried to keep up appearances, but the truth was too heavy to hide. Bills piled higher, and the bank's warnings grew louder. Soon the final notice came: foreclosure. The mansion, the prize that made him the golden child, was no longer his. It slipped from his hands like sand, and for the first time, he tasted what it meant to be powerless. His parents, once so proud, tried to shield him. They told neighbors it was just a temporary setback, that Callan was still their shining star. But the cracks were visible. People whispered about his downfall, about the wasted chances and reckless pride. The image of the golden child they had built so carefully began to crumble, piece by piece. While Callan's world was collapsing, Nola's was rising higher than anyone expected. The business she once built quietly had now exploded into success. Her app expanded across cities, helping thousands of small businesses thrive. Investors who had once ignored her now lined up for meetings, eager to be part of her vision. She signed a multi-million-dollar deal that not only secured her future, but also placed her name among the most admired young CEOs. Headlines carried her story, from rejection to revolution. Nola, the woman who redefined success, the CEO who turned pain into power. Her picture appeared on magazines, her voice was heard at conferences, and her journey inspired many. People who once mocked her now spoke her name with respect. Back in her family's circle, silence fell heavier than words. The daughter they once gave a crumpled bill now commanded respect across the nation. Their pride in Callan had been shattered, while the child they dismissed was now their only real success story. The tables had turned completely. And as Nola stood in boardrooms signing contracts worth millions, she knew one thing with certainty. She had built a crown that no one could take away. The night was calm when Nola's car rolled smoothly down the familiar road that led to the neighborhood she once knew so well. The street looked different now, older, quieter, but the memories came back all the same. At the corner, she slowed her car, her eyes catching sight of a house that once symbolized everything her family had celebrated, Callan's mansion. It no longer looked like the grand prize it once was. The garden was dry, weeds crawling up the edges of the fence. The lights that once blazed through the windows during endless parties were gone, leaving the house in heavy silence. A faded sign stood by the gate, for auction. The driveway, once lined with expensive cars, now sat empty, the gravel untouched for weeks. Nola parked across the street for a moment, her hands resting gently on the wheel. Through the darkened windows, she imagined the echoes of laughter that had once filled the halls. She remembered the cheers, the glasses raised for Callan, the claps on his back, the night he was handed the keys while she was given a crumpled bill. That memory burned sharp, but tonight it felt different. Tonight it was not pain, it was proof. The mansion that once stood as her family's crown had become nothing more than a hollow shell. The walls that had witnessed her humiliation now stood empty, stripped of pride. Her parents had believed that favoring one child would bring them glory, but the very symbol of their favoritism had collapsed under its own weight. She could almost see her brother pacing inside, struggling with debts he could no longer pay. His friends gone, his pride broken. She could almost hear her parents' excuses, their desperate attempts to explain away what had happened. But none of them were there tonight. The house sat abandoned, its silence louder than any defense they could make. Nola leaned back in her seat, her eyes calm. She had no desire to stop, no urge to step inside and revisit the pain. She did not need to. Everything the house represented had already spoken for itself. She had left with nothing but $5 in her hand, and now she returned in a sleek car, her success shining brighter than the mansion ever did. As she drove away, she felt no anger, no need for revenge. Instead, she felt clarity. Her parents had gambled their love on favoritism, betting everything on Callan's crown. And in the end, they had lost. The road stretched ahead, lit by the city lights, and Nola pressed forward, her heart steady. The mansion faded in the distance, but her own story was only just beginning. The hall was filled with bright lights and the buzz of cameras as Nola stepped onto the stage. The event was not just any gathering. It was a celebration of her company signing yet another groundbreaking deal. Reporters filled the front rows, pens ready, microphones stretched toward her. In the back sat her family, quiet and uneasy, their eyes following her every move. Nola stood tall, her confidence shining through her calm smile. She adjusted the microphone, her voice steady as she began to speak. "For a long time," she said, her words carrying through the room, "I was told I wasn't enough. I was measured not by my dreams, but by what others decided I deserved." A ripple of silence spread across the hall as the cameras clicked, capturing every second. Her parents shifted in their seats, their faces stiff, as though each word cut deeper than the last. Callan stared down, unable to meet her gaze. But Nola didn't pause, her voice grew stronger. "What I learned is this. When someone tries to measure your worth in pennies, remember, their blindness cannot dim your value." The crowd erupted, applause crashing like waves against the walls. The flash of cameras turned the moment into history. People stood, cheering her name, celebrating her strength. Nola smiled, not out of pride for proving anyone wrong, but for finally standing in her own truth. Her parents sat frozen, their expressions a mix of regret and disbelief. The daughter they once dismissed, the one they handed only scraps, had become greater than all the promises they had placed on their son. The golden child they had chosen had fallen, while the child they overlooked had risen higher than they could ever imagine. As the applause continued, Nola stepped back from the microphone, her heart steady. She had no need to gloat, no need for revenge. Her words had already painted the truth in bold colors for the world to see. She was not only successful, she was unshakable. That night, the world saw her as a leader, an inspiration, a woman who turned rejection into fuel for greatness. And as she left the stage, Walking past the flashing cameras and the roaring cheers, she knew something her family had only just realized. She had already won.